News of the Times. The Southend Seducer. The murder of Florence Dennis in 1894. On the evening of the 25th of June 1894, in a quiet field near Prittlewell, a young man walking home noticed something unusual in the grass. A single glove, lying beside a narrow brook, and a few yards further on, he found blood. And at the bottom of the shallow stream lay the body of 23-year-old Florence Dennis. She'd been shot at close range. The hair around the wound was singed, the skin blackened by powder. The bullet had entered just above her left ear and lodged deep within her brain. There was no weapon. Within hours, local police telegraphed to Scotland Yard. What began as a lonely death in an Essex field would quickly become a case of national attention involving forged identities, missing dock funds, secret lodgings in Mitcham, and a man living 3 separate lives. Tonight we examine the case of the Southend Seducer and the Scotland Yard investigation that brought him to the gallows. And in our further particulars tonight, we step into the Westminster Police Court, where a clairvoyant, a civil engineer, and a crystal ball, and an inconvenient baby combined to provide the public with one of the most entertaining mornings justice could offer. So, settle in and allow yourself to step back into the world of 1894, a world of telegrams and railway platforms, crystal balls, and crowded courtrooms, where reputation was everything and scandal travelled quickly. From the London Evening Standard, the 26th of June 1894, supposed murder at Southend. The remains of Florence Dennis, 23, were found near Prittlewell last night by a man named Rush, who was returning from his work. The body was lying partially in a small brook. There was a gunshot wound by the left ear. No weapon was found. The girl, who has been living for some time at Wellesley Road, Southend-on-Sea, had been, it is stated, betrayed by her lover, and her condition caused her the greatest distress. She went out on Sunday night to meet him, he having, it is alleged, promised to marry her and make arrangements that night for the wedding. Nothing further was heard of her until her dead body was found. Another account. A young gentleman named Rush, while walking through Prittlewell, a secluded spot about a mile from Southend, saw at the bottom of a sloping road leading to Victoria Avenue a woman's glove. It lay in the field near the brook, and close to it were what on examination proved to be bloodstains. Proceeding to the bank, Mr. Rush was horrified to find the body of a young woman in the bed of the stream. Her face was concealed by her hat, but it didn't take long to see that there was a wound just above the left ear, and it was clear that she was dead. He at once communicated the facts to the police at Southend. The body was that of a rather short, good-looking girl. The wound in the head was found to have been caused by a revolver shot, and the discoloration and singeing of the hair go to prove that the muzzle must have been thrust very close to the head when the trigger was pressed. There was very little water in the brook. On examining the ground nearby, it was clearly established that the girl was attacked about 8 feet from the bank of the stream, for blood marks were visible, and there was an unbroken track of them down to the water. From this it appears that the crime was perpetrated on the brow of the hill, and the body was either dragged down to the ditch or the unhappy victim staggered there herself. A very vigilant search of the whole neighbourhood by the police failed to reveal any trace of the revolver. The body has been removed to the Spread Eagle Inn in Prittlewell, where the Essex Coroner will investigate the crime tomorrow. Such was the account presented to the public on the morning following the discovery. A young woman found in a brook at Prittlewell, shot at close range, and with no weapon to be found. The language of the press was necessarily restrained, yet it conveyed sufficient detail to make clear that this was no ordinary occurrence. The deceased, as she was termed in the reports, was Florence Dennis, aged 23. Before she became the subject of headlines and inquests, she had been a daughter in a South London household and a sister visiting the seaside town of Southend. From the London Standard, 27th of June 1894, murder near Southend. At about 8 o'clock on Monday evening, the body of a young woman was found in a brook at Prittlewell, a village about 2 miles from Southend. The scene of the discovery was a field which is approached across the meadow by the side of the vicarage, and at the bottom of which runs a brook, and which is separated from the path by a hedge. Near the centre of the field was a pool of blood on the path, and it is supposed that the body was dragged across the field from that spot to the brook, patches of blood being discernible here and there amongst the high grass. In the immediate neighbourhood of the body, a quantity of wheat had been trampled underfoot, as if a man had hidden himself after committing the murder before venturing into the highway leading into Prittlewell. Half a dozen yards further he came upon a large pool of clotted blood, and close by in the ditch was the body of the young woman. On examination she was found to be lifeless. She was lying on her back, and her dark double-breasted jacket was buttoned. Her straw hat lay upon her breast, which was clutched tightly by the right hand. On the left side of her head, and immediately above the left ear, a bullet wound showed itself clearly. The hole in the temple was surrounded by blood, and the hair slightly discoloured from the same cause. The body of the unfortunate girl was identified by Mrs. Ayres as that of her sister, Miss Florence Dennis, aged 23. The girl was engaged as a dressmaker in the West End of London and lived with her father and mother at home. She had during the last week been visiting her sister, who is married to a man named Ayres, the manager of the Express Dairy Company's Southend depot. During her brief stay at Southend, the deceased had gained the goodwill of many of the inhabitants. Late on Sunday afternoon or early in the evening, the deceased left her sister's house to go for a short walk, and as she did not return home, her absence excited grave alarm. On a Monday evening, her sister went to the police, who informed her of the dreadful discovery, and upon proceeding to the Spread Eagle, Mrs. Ayres identified the body as that of her sister. Dr. Waters of Whitegate Road, Prittlewell, states that he found a mark of a pistol shot on the left temple. From all appearances, the bullet had penetrated the brain. There was no doubt that the wound was the cause of death. With the identification of the unfortunate young woman as Florence Dennis, attention did not long remain unfocused. It soon became known that she had for some time past been acquainted with a married man, James Canham Reed, a clerk employed at the Royal Albert Docks, residing with his wife and 8 children in Jamaica Street in Stepney. Evidence suggested that Reed had been meeting Florence during her stay at Southend, and that their association had been of a nature likely to occasion difficulty. At the time of her death, Florence was about to become a mother, and it was understood that she had sought from Reed some arrangement in respect of her position. In these circumstances, it was perhaps inevitable that suspicion should turn in his direction. Another correspondent telegraphs that Miss Florence Dennis was the daughter of a harness maker carrying on business at Shakespeare Road in Herne Hill. She made the acquaintance some 2 years ago of James Canham Reed, a clerk who lived with his wife and 8 children at 57 Jamaica Street in Stepney. Reed courted the girl and ultimately seduced her. Only recently she had ascertained that Reed was a married man, and that discovery greatly distressed her. She became desperate and finally threatened Reed with exposure. On Saturday, Reed sent the girl 2 telegrams, making appointments to meet her at Southend that night, and he left home without telling his wife where he was going. At 9:30 on Sunday night, Reed and Dennis were seen in company within half a mile of the spot where the girl's body was subsequently found. Reed was then persuading his companion to continue their walk across some lonely fields, and, evidently, she at length consented. On Monday afternoon, Mrs. Aris, uneasy at the disappearance of her sister and knowing that she had been in Reed's company the previous day, telegraphed to Reed at the Albert Docks, inquiring if Florence was with him. Reed immediately wrote and posted a letter, which was subsequently received by Mrs. Aris, stating that he was surprised to receive her telegram, as he had not seen Florence for 18 months. Once his name had been placed before the authorities, inquiries were immediately directed towards James Canham Reed. Officers communicated with his place of employment at the Royal Albert Dock, where he served as a clerk in the General Office, and it was ascertained that he had attended at his desk on the Monday morning following Florence's Dennis's disappearance, signing the attendance book at 10:15. By the afternoon, however, he had left the premises and didn't return. A subsequent examination of his accounts revealed serious irregularity or missing money, as certain papers appeared to have been destroyed. Reed himself had vanished. The coincidence of his sudden absence, taken together with the discovery at Prittlewell, could not be overlooked. Yesterday his books and cash were examined, and the sum of £150, worth approximately £25,000 in 2024, was found to be missing. Certain papers and vouchers had evidently been burned. It has been ascertained that 3 weeks ago Reed had a revolver which he kept in a drawer in his house, and the weapon cannot now be found. Florence Dennis was 23 years of age at the time of her death. She was the daughter of a harness maker residing in Shakespeare Road, Herne Hill, and was employed as a dressmaker in the West End of London. In June of 1894, she had come to stay with her married sister, Mrs. Aris, at Southend-on-Sea. Her visit appears to have been of an ordinary domestic character, and during her brief stay she was described as being in good health and spirits. It later emerged, however, that Florence was about to become a mother. That circumstances known within her family placed her in a position of increasing difficulty, and it was in connection with this matter that she had arranged to meet James Canham Reed on the evening before her death. James Canham Reed was a clerk employed in the General Office of the Royal Albert Docks. He was approximately 36 to 39 years of age, slim build and gentlemanly appearance, and he resided at 57 Jamaica Street in Stepney with his wife and 8 children. By all outward appearance, he was a respectable family man in steady employment, earning a modest salary supplemented by occasional agency work. For some 2 years prior to the events at Southend, Reed had been acquainted with Florence Dennis, and during that period he had concealed from her the fact of his marriage. It appears that Florence first became acquainted with James Canham Reed some years earlier, during a period when she was visiting her sister, Mrs. Aris, then residing at St. John's Hill in Wandsworth. Reed was known to the family circle at the time and was seen calling at the house and walking out with Florence. Their relationship could be attested to several residents of the neighbourhood. The body of Florence Dennis was removed to the Spread Eagle Inn at Prittlewell, and arrangements were made for a formal inquiry. Under English law, a sudden unexplained death required examination before a coroner and a jury. Accordingly, on the 28th of June, an inquest was opened at Prittlewell before Mr. C. Lewis, the Essex coroner, to determine by what means the young woman had met her end. It was there, in the measured language of medical testimony and sworn evidence, that the circumstances surrounding her final hours be set out in detail. From the London Evening Standard, the 28th of June 1894, the murder near Southend. Mr. C. Lewis opened an inquest at Prittlewell near Southend yesterday on the body of Florence Dennis, aged 23, lately residing at 24 Wesley Road in Southend, whose body was discovered in a brook at Prittlewell on Monday evening with a bullet wound in the temple. Frederick Rush, the young man who made the discovery, briefly recounted how, at 5:45 on Monday evening, he observed the glove upon the footpath and, looking into the brook, saw the body of the deceased lying upon her back. Police Sergeant Marden stated that earlier that same day, Mrs. Irish had reported her sister missing, explaining that she had left home the previous evening to meet a gentleman. Upon examination of the scene, the grass on the brow of the bank was found to be trodden down over a space of several feet, and a clot of blood lay upon the footpath opposite the position of the body. No footmarks could be discerned. In one of the deceased's pockets, she was found to have 1 shilling and sixpence. The bullet recovered from her brain was produced before the jury. Superintendent Hawtrey stated that on the Monday evening he had telegraphed to Scotland Yard requesting the arrest of a man whose name had been supplied by the deceased's sister. Mrs. Irish then gave evidence. She confirmed that Florence had come to stay with her about a week before her death and that she was pregnant. During that period, 2 telegrams had been received from London directing that they be left at the General Post Office in Southend until called for. One requested an appointment. The second stated that the sender would be arriving by the 9:30 train from Liverpool Street. Florence went out to meet him on the Saturday evening and again on the Sunday at 9:10. She did not return. Mrs. Irish further stated that she saw James Canham Reid waiting at the Great Eastern Railway Station on the Sunday evening. The coroner asked, "Have you ever spoken to this man?" "Yes, many a time," she replied. She added that some years earlier, whilst living at Wandsworth, she had seen Florence and Reid together frequently, both believing at that time that he was unmarried. On the Monday morning, she telegraphed to him at the Royal Albert Dock, "Where is Florrie? Wire at once." On the following day she received his reply, June 29th, 1894. "Dear Mrs. Irish, what is the meaning of your extraordinary wire? Please write fully. I have not seen this young person for quite 18 months, when you were at St. John's Hill. Yours faithfully, J.C. Reid." Evidence was then given that Reid had attended at the docks on the Monday morning, signing the attendance book at 10:15, but had left during the afternoon and had not returned. Dr. Avery Waters confirmed that the wound above the left ear had been caused by a revolver discharged at close range. The edges of the wound were blackened and the hair singed. The bullet had lodged in the brain. With the inquest concluded with the verdict of wilful murder against James Canham Reid, the matter passed beyond local inquiry. The findings of the coroner's jury provided the necessary authority for further action, and the responsibility for tracing the accused fell formally into the hands of the Criminal Investigation Department. Scotland Yard, already appraised of the case, now undertook the task of locating a man who had quitted his employment, withdrawn a considerable sum of money, and was no longer to be found at his residence in Stepney. The search had begun. From the London Evening Standard, the 5th of July, 1894, the murder near Southend. The arrest of James Cannon Reid for murder near Southend was effected on Saturday afternoon at Mitcham by Detective Inspector Baker of the Criminal Investigation Department. The house in which Reid was found is one of the many brick and timber built cottages which abound in this particular locality. It is not far removed from the Three Kings Public House, an old hostelry which stands opposite an ornamental pond. Detectives traced Reid to separate lodgings at Mitcham, where it was discovered that he had for some months been residing under another name. There he was known as Mr. Benson. The accommodation had been secured in February in a response to an advertisement for furnished rooms. Correspondence had been conducted from Mile End Road under that assumed identity. Upon taking the rooms, he represented himself as a clerk and traveller connected with a city firm of tea merchants whose business frequently required his absence during the week. He subsequently returned with a woman whom he described as his wife, together with an infant child, and he entered into occupation of a sitting room and a bedroom. The landlady, unaware of the growing scandal and not in the habit of reading the newspapers, had entertained no suspicion. Even when Reid remained at home longer than usual and appeared troubled in manner, he attributed his altered appearance to business difficulties. Thus, while maintaining a household in Stepney with his lawful wife and children, Reid had established a second domestic arrangement in Surrey under an assumed name. The inquiry at Mitcham revealed more than an assumed name. The woman who had been residing there as Mrs. Benson and was Miss Beatrix Kempton, aged 27, the daughter of a retired printer of Cambridge. She had made Reid's acquaintance some 2 years earlier at Kensington, knowing him only as Benson and believing him to be unmarried and engaged in commercial travel. At his persuasion, she had left her family home and lived with him first in Hertfordshire, where her child was born, and later at Mitcham. Throughout this period, she remained unaware that the man she regarded as her husband was in fact James Cannon Reid of Stepney, already married and the father of a large family. She stated that she had understood him to be employed by a firm of tea merchants in the city and had no knowledge of his position at the Royal Albert Dock. When informed of his true identity and arrest on a charge of murder, she expressed disbelief. At the time of his apprehension, Reid was in possession of a sum of money, part of which she believed to be her own, derived from the sale of property left to her. She also produced a document purporting to be a marriage certificate, but the authenticity of which would later be called into question. From the London Evening Standard, the 5th of July, 1894, murder near Southend. On the prisoner's arrival at Southend, large crowds gathered at the station, the entrance to which was guarded by a strong body of police. Reid was driven in a cab to the county police station, followed by a large number of people who occasionally raised cries of "Lynch him!" There was also a great deal of hissing and hooting. On his arrival at the police station, the prisoner was charged in the presence of Superintendent Hawtrey with the wilful murder of Miss Dennis. When searched at the station, a large sum of money was found in his possession. Mrs. Reid was communicated with. She had an interview with her husband yesterday afternoon, and since his arrest, Reid had been in a very dejected condition, and he will be brought before a special sitting of the magistrates today. With the arrest of James Cannon Reid upon suspicion of the murder of Florence Dennis, the case assumed a prominence beyond that of a local tragedy. The disclosure of his separate establishment at Mitcham, maintained under an assumed name, together with the circumstances of his domestic life in Stepney, provided ample material for the metropolitan press. Accounts of the alleged double existence were reproduced at length, and the affair was soon the subject of widespread discussion. When Reed was brought before the magistrates, the court was densely attended. Crowds gathered both within and without, eager to observe the man whose name had become associated not only with a charge of wilful murder, but with deception, concealment, and financial irregularity. It was in this atmosphere of public scrutiny that he first appeared to answer the accusation. From the London Evening Standard, the 10th of July, 1894, the Southend murder. James Canham Reed, cashier formerly employed at the Royal Albert Docks in London, was charged at the Southend Police Court yesterday morning with the wilful murder of Florence Dennis, aged 23 years, in a field at Prittlewell near Southend on June the 24th. The court was densely crowded and the greatest excitement prevailed. Large crowds, unable to gain admittance to the court, gathered outside. Reed, who was clad in a light tweed suit and carried a white straw hat, was accompanied in the dock by Inspector Chase and Police Constable Reeve. The prisoner assumed a careless air, and there was slight murmurs from the backs of the court when he answered to his name. He was supplied with paper and pencil, and he took copious notes prior to the commencement of the proceedings. Superintendent Hawtrey asked that the prisoner should be remanded until Monday next. The prisoner said he could not offer no objection, but he had application to make before he was again conveyed to the cells, and that was that he should have returned to him all the money that was taken from him when he was arrested, in order that he might be in a position to engage counsel for his defence. Superintendent Hawtrey said he must object to prisoner having the money returned to him. Prisoner, when arrested, had a watch and other articles in his possession which he did not object to being handed over to him. The prisoner said he hoped that every facility would be given him to engage counsel, consistent with any arrangement that might be made by the Treasury. He had a watch and chain and 2 gold rings which he would like handed over to him. The prisoner was remanded for a week. From the London Evening Standard, the 16th of July, 1894, the Southend murder. Reed before the magistrates. At the Southend Borough Police Court this morning, before the Mayor and other justices, James Canham Reed, described on the charge sheet as a commercial clerk, was brought up on remand, charged with the wilful murder of Florence Dennis at Prittlewell near Southend on the night of Sunday, the 24th inst. At the conclusion of the inquest on Thursday week, the jury returned a verdict of wilful murder against Reed, and on the following Saturday he was arrested at Mitcham under circumstances that have already been fully reported. Inspector Baker was then called and said that on Saturday, July 7th, he went to Rose Cottage, Fair Green in Upper Mitcham, where he saw the prisoner. Prisoner denied that his name was James Canham Reed. Witness said he should arrest him as being James Canham Reed on the charge of murdering Florence Dennis. Prisoner said, "You are on the wrong scent." The accused man had instructed his legal advisers that he had never been intimate with the murdered girl and was in no way responsible for her condition. He also denies that he was in the Southend either on the Saturday or Sunday up to this morning. Following the return of the coroner's verdict, and notwithstanding Reed's initial protestations, including his curious assertion at the time of arrest that he was not James Canham Reed, the case was committed for trial. In the weeks that followed, the affair remained prominent before the public. The revelations concerning his assumed name at Mitcham, his domestic life in Stepney, and the circumstances of Florence Dennis's death were reported in detail by the metropolitan press, and the proceedings were closely followed. Reed, having deposed of certain personal effects in order to secure legal representation, appeared in court maintaining a composed and self-possessed demeanour. Observers remarked upon his coolness in the dock. When the trial opened, the court was crowded. Public interest had not diminished. The prosecution commenced by setting out in deliberate sequence the movements of Florence Dennis on the evening of Sunday the 24th of June and the events which had followed. It was upon that reconstruction of time and circumstance that the case would rest. Mr. Lamb, in opening the case for the court, stated that he would confine himself strictly to facts capable of proof. The prisoner, he said, was a married man with a wife and a family of 8 children residing at 57 Jamaica Street in Stepney. Yet, in addition to that home, he had for some months maintained another establishment, first at Hallingbury and later at Mitcham, where he lived under the assumed name of Edgar Benson, with a woman named Beatrice Diva Kempton, by whom he'd had a child. Florence Dennis, aged 23, was single, but at the time of her death was about to become a mother. In September 1889, while Florence was visiting her sister at Wandsworth, she was introduced to the prisoner. In October 1892, the prisoner met Miss Kempton at Gloucester Road Station and represented himself to her as Edgar Benson, a single man and commercial traveller. Those statements were untrue. Under that name he maintained correspondence from Mile End Road and in due course lived with her as her husband. When pressed for marriage, he produced a document purporting to be a certificate of marriage at Kensington, which would later be shown to be false. Throughout 1893 and into the present year, he divided his time between his lawful home and his assumed household. While at Hallingbury, he displayed a pistol, stating that he carried it for protection. Meanwhile, his financial position had deteriorated. Letters written to Miss Kempton spoke of pressing debts and urgent necessity. He described himself as dead broke. In June 1894, Florence Dennis returned to Southend. Telegrams passed between her and the prisoner. He informed Miss Kempton that he was obliged to travel to Canterbury on important business, yet evidence would show that he travelled instead toward Southend. On the Saturday evening, Florence went out to meet him and returned home dissatisfied. A further appointment was arranged for the Sunday night. On that evening, she was seen in his company near the Great Eastern Railway Station, and later walked towards the fields at Brittlewell. In the early hours of the morning, he was observed alone at Benfleet. The following day, when questioned by telegram, he denied having seen Florence for many months. He left his employment and he didn't return. When arrested at Mitcham, he had recently purchased new clothing and was found in possession of money. The bullet recovered from Florence Dennis's head would, the prosecution contended, correspond with ammunition previously connected to the prisoner. Thus the Crown proposed to establish not only opportunity, but motive, preparation, deception, and flight. Inspector Baker described the arrest at Mitcham and the search of the premises. Letters signed Edgar were recovered, together with a document purporting to be a marriage certificate. At the Stepney address, a blank form of such a certificate was also discovered. When apprehended, the prisoner made several remarks, including the curious observation that Mrs. Ayres knew more about this than he did. Evidence was then given that £159 was missing from the docks, and a separate warrant for theft had been obtained. Witnesses placed the prisoner in the vicinity of Brittlewell on the Sunday night. One man identified him as the individual seen walking with Florence Dennis shortly before her death. Under cross-examination, he admitted that he had not seen the man's face clearly, relying instead upon dress and a manner of walking. At the conclusion of the day's proceedings, the case was adjourned. Throughout the proceedings, Reed maintained a composed and confident bearing. From the dock he continued to assert that he had not seen Florence Dennis for some 18 months prior to her death, and that he had no knowledge of her condition. While in custody during the trial, he wrote several letters, aware that they would be subject to official scrutiny. In these communications, he repeated the same position, denying recent association with Florence and disavowing responsibility for her circumstances. Thus, even as the prosecution laid out its sequence of meetings, telegrams, and movements, Reed adhered steadily to his original claim. It was upon that denial that the defence would largely rest. From the Illustrated Police News, the 3rd of November, 1894, Reed in prison. James Canham Reed, the man charged with the murder of Florence Dennis in Southend, is reportedly to have slightly suffered in health. The long maintenance of a nonchalant manner while Reed is at Chelmsford waiting his trial has considerably shaken his nervous system, and during the last few days he has suffered from nervous excitement following upon sleepless nights. He has written to a friend stating that he has been anticipating news to the effect that the grand jury would decide to find no bill. Reed referred to his sleeplessness as the natural result of the time and attention he is devoting to his defence. In this task he has spent on an average some 3 or 4 hours daily, and the mental strain has certainly told upon him. In another letter he reiterates his protestation of innocence and says, "I'm confident of an acquittal, for as I've said before and repeat now, I have not seen Florrie Dennis for 18 or 20 months, and was as much surprised as anyone at her death." 70 witnesses will be called for the prosecution, and it is understood that Reed will call 3 or 4 witnesses, but they will not only asked to speak to character. Notwithstanding the prisoner's continued assurance of innocence, the evidence as presented by the court was regarded by many observers as compelling. After hearing the summing up and retiring for a brief deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. The announcement was received in a courtroom already charged with expectation. In the days that followed, the metropolitan press treated the result as the fitting conclusion to a case marked by deception, divided loyalties, and calculated concealment. Commentators spoke of the exposure of a double life and the tragic consequences that had followed. For the public, long attentive to each development, the verdict brought the matter to its formal close. From the Illustrated Police News, 24th of November, 1894. Sentence. The mystery of the revolting murder of Florence Dennis has been solved. She was shot by James Canham Reed on June the 24th at Prittlewell, near Southend. That was the verdict of the jury, and the judge added that, in his opinion, no person who has been in court to hear the evidence could have any doubt upon it, and in due form the sentence of death was passed on the convict. It was the conclusion everyone expected, for the damning chain of evidence was wound round Reed, link by link, until he stood helpless and convicted. The principal features of this notorious trial are so well known that only a brief sketch of the facts are now necessary. The body of Florence Dennis was found near a secluded footpath through some fields at Prittlewell, and the cause of death undoubtedly was a bullet wound in the head. The theory of suicide was untenable because of the reason that no pistol was found near the body. It was true that the girl had been wronged and was about to become a mother, but there was no reason to suppose she contemplated self-destruction. She went out the fateful Sunday evening for a walk and was never seen again alive. That she was murdered by someone was the only inference to be drawn. From the discovery of the poor girl's body, the question immediately arose, whose interest was it to get rid of her? The convict Reed was at once suspected because there was no reason to suppose that he had immoral relations with the girl. Mrs. Aris, the dead girl's sister who lived at Southend, telegraphed to Reed at the docks to know where her sister was. Immediately Reed received this telegram, he left his employment and never came back to it, which was an extraordinary thing for an innocent man to do. No doubt that he had been embezzling money at the docks, but it was extraordinary he should choose the day he received the telegram asking for the whereabouts of Florence Dennis for his flight to the house at Mitcham, where, under the name of Benson, he was living as the supposed husband of a Miss Kempton, another of the victims of his criminal lust. Several witnesses deposed to have seen him at Southend on the day of the crime, and a policeman encountered and spoke to him at Benfleet the next day on his way to London, and it was also proved that he was possessed of a revolver firing a bullet similar to that which was the cause of death of Florence Dennis. No one witness for the defence was called, although the least bit of evidence calculated to throw doubt upon the evidence of the witnesses who swore to having seen him at Pritwell might have saved him. But he was absolutely unable to give the slightest clue to his movements during the time immediately before and after the murder, and from the character of the man, it is without doubt that no matter what he had been doing, however criminal or wicked, other than the murder of Florence Dennis, he would have told it to his solicitor to save himself from hanging. For as Mr. Lockwood put it, Reed was hardly a man to save any woman's honour or reputation if his interest required the sacrifice. With these positive indictments of guilt in view, it is impossible to think that Reed was not guilty. It is a grim story of brutal desire producing in a man such utter hardness of nature that he did not even shrink from murder as a way of escape from the difficulties which his vices created, and there will be none to pity and few to think that the punishment in store for him is more than he richly deserves. So the case concluded as the jury had determined. The judge, in passing sentence, spoke with the confidence of a court persuaded that the chain of circumstances admitted of no reasonable doubt. The press, for its part, treated the verdict as the inevitable unmasking of a double life and the exposure of calculated deceit. James Cannon Reed was executed at Chelmsford Prison on the 20th of November 1894. It was reported that his lawful wife visited him during his confinement and expressed forgiveness towards him before his death. Beyond that, little more was recorded of her. To contemporaries the matter seems settled, yet what remains more than a century later is not the fervour of the commentary, but the structure of the evidence, the telegrams, the divided households, the false certificate, the missing funds, the revolver, the walk across the fields at Prittlewell. Florence Dennis was 23 years of age. Her life and that of her unborn child ended beside a quiet brook in Essex. The consequence of that June evening reached outward into two households, into the columns of the London press, and ultimately to the scaffold. Such was the judgment of the court in 1894. Such is the record that remains. Further particulars. If one wished to be entertained in late Victorian London and had no pressing employment to attend to, one did not necessarily require the theatre. One could simply attend the magistrates' court. There, for the modest price of patience and a reasonably sturdy constitution, the public might enjoy seduction, indignation, moral posturing, perjury, handwriting comparisons, and, on especially fortunate mornings, a clairvoyant with a crystal ball. In November of 1894, the Westminster Police Court provided just such a spectacle. The case concerned an affiliation of summons, a civil engineer, a former servant, and a child named Ethel. Also included was a lady fortune teller who, although apparently able to see the future, had been quite unable to foresee the present difficulty. The court was crowded, the laughter frequent, and the revelations remarkable. From the Illustrated Police News, the 3rd of November, 1894. Extraordinary case. At the Westminster Police Court on Saturday before Mr. Shale, some remarkable revelations were made in the course of the hearing of an affiliation summons against Mr. Edward Howarth, a civil engineer of Chelsea, who was proceeded against by his late servant Louisa Johnson, in respect of a child named Ethel, born on the 1st of November 1892. The complainant, a smart-looking girl, said that in April 1891 she entered the service of Mrs. Howarth, a lady carrying on an extensive business as a fortune teller and clairvoyant. Mrs. Howarth had a brass plate on the door with her name on it, and was consulted every day by well-dressed people, many of them being ladies who came in carriages. She told fortunes with the aid of a crystal ball, cards, etc., and it was on some of these occasions, when she was so engaged, that the defendant, who was in the kitchen, called witness from the scullery and acted in an improper way. On other occasions, Mr. Howarth went into her bedroom and stayed with her. His wife was away on a visit to Yarmouth at the time. Prosecution remarked that as a clairvoyant she ought to have known and seen all of these things. Loud laughter. Witness went on to say that these occurrences went on during the early part of 1891 and were continued till July, after she found herself pregnant. In the preceding April she had informed the defendant as to her condition, and he gave her pills and medicine. She produced one of the boxes of pills, which she never took. In July she had to tell Mrs. Howarth the position of affairs, and in consequence she had to leave at once. From the time of the birth of the child in November 1891 till August last, she regularly received postal orders either from a Mr. or Mrs. Howarth, accompanied by letters which she put in. Mr. Dutton, solicitor for the girl, put in several letters commencing "Dear Louisa" and referring to the enclosure of money. In 2 instances, regret was expressed that the amount was not larger, and in one, the girl was wished a pleasant Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Laughter. Complainant said that she had often seen her master write, unquestionably, all the letters and envelopes or in his handwriting, so he had not signed them. The letter wishing her the compliments of the season was sent to her at Christmas time, 1892. Latterly, the witness said, Mrs. Howarth had kept up the payments for the baby, and the following communications, among others, were in her handwriting. One of the letters stated, Mrs. Howarth would like to know if you're aware that Mr. Howarth has been put out of work since Friday after you left, and is still out of work. Mrs. Howarth seizes your letters and is not in position to help you very much. Another letter dated September 1893 says, when I read your letter which came last Saturday, I saw the mistake I had made, and for not telling you that all the assistance you have had from me since you left has been out of charity, but for no other reason whatever. My husband has been out of employment for nearly 14 months. I am probably the only one who can try to help you. Would you please write to me if you have anything to say? I may tell you I open and read all letters. Mr. Dutton to the witness. Since August, the payments to you have ceased, and therefore you took these proceedings? The witness said, yes. In the absence of other direct corroboration, the defendant was called and examined. He swore that the letters which the girl had produced as his were not in his handwriting, as far as he knew. Pressed by the magistrate, who cautioned him, he swore positively they were not his, and gave categorical denials to the whole of the girl's story. He did not deny the authenticity of his wife's letters, but she had never told him that the complainant suggested that he was the father of her child. The first time he heard the charge against him was in September of the present year. By Mr. Dutton, witness denied giving the girl medicine or pills or going to a chemist whose name was put to him. He said he never divested himself of attire in the kitchen during his wife's hours of duty from 11 till 5 or at any time. Mr. Dutton: what are your wife's duties? Witness said, I decline to say. Mr. Dutton: have you seen this magic crystal ball which your wife uses? Witness had protested against answering. He did not see the drift of the question. Laughter. He did not know what the ball was for and had never seen it used. Mr. Dutton: do the ladies look into it after their futures are foretold? Witness excitedly said, what is this to do with it? Mr. Dutton: I will tell you your answers now, which go to credit seems about as true as the rest of your story. Tell me, what does your wife use this crystal ball for? Witness says, she has informed me that she uses it to hypnotize herself and then she sees things in it. Mr. Dutton: do you answer the door to the ladies who come in their carriages? Witness said, I have seen ladies come in carriages. Mr. Dutton: your wife carries on a large fortune-telling business. Witness said, no, not to my knowledge. Mr. Shield: I may tell you I don't believe you. Witness said, she is clairvoyant. At this stage of the proceedings, the witness was put to a test. By direction of Mr. Dutton, with the approval of the magistrate, he was obliged to write on sheets of foolscap, both with quill and steel pens, the language of the letters which the girl had sworn were in his handwriting. Mr. Dutton, comparing these writings, said it left the matter beyond doubt. For the last time of asking, did he seriously and solemnly maintain on his oath that the communications to the defendant were not his? The defendant: I swear I never wrote and I never saw them before this case was in court. Mr. Dutton said, very well, this matter won't end here. Mrs. Howarth, a portly personage of mature age who had been out of court during her husband's examination, was called in to give evidence and described herself as an amanuensis, a copyrightist, and a corrector for the press. Mr. Dutton: anything else? Witness said, no, sir. Mr. Dutton: have you a large business? Witness said, fairly so. Mr. Dutton: what is your fee from each lady? Laughter. Witness: what do you mean? I've never fixed a fee. It's according to the work done. I'm paid by the folio. Loud laughter. But what is that to do with the case? I shall decline to answer your questions. I am your witness subpoenaed here, and these matters are irrelevant. Mr. Dutton, producing the letters which the girl had sworn were in the witness' hand, asked if she admitted the authorship. Witness, after much cross-examination, said the letters were hers, but the dates had been altered and added. Mr. Shield was proceeded to question her, asked to the documents, when she was interrupted. His worship, you may be very clever as a fortune teller, but I don't suppose you know in advance what I was going to ask you. Laughter. Witness went on to say that from the time of the complainant leaving her service in 1892 down to September of the present year, she never spoke to her husband about the girl's baby. If this objectionable method of cross-examination was continued, she would fall down in hysterics. She was sure she should. Loud laughter. The examination proceeded, and Mrs. Howarth said she had sent money to the girl out of charity, having always been a kind and indulgent mistress. Mr. Shield, your husband was out of employment. How can you send this money to the girl? Witness said, by my own means. She added that she could not say how much she had sent. When one did acts of pure generosity and charity, as she did, they were not accustomed to keeping a debit and credit amount. Mr. Dutton read various extracts from the letters in evidence and inquiring what she meant by them to a discharged servant. Witness said, I sent them from time to time to prevent my husband being annoyed. Mr. Shield, you just said it was charity. Cross-examined by Mr. Dutton and repeatedly protesting, she said that she did not have any lady customers, and gentlemen too. Perhaps the solicitor would like their names. Mr. Dutton, oh yes, a little more light on your business will do no harm. Witness said, Mr. Justice McCarthy MP, and there is the young lady who collaborates with him in some of his novels. Loud laughter. Mr. Dutton, do tell Mr. McCarthy's fortunes with the crystal ball. Forecast his political horoscope. Roars of laughter. Witness with scorn. Sir, I consider that an impertinent question. More laughter. Mr. Dutton, but you were a fortune teller. Witness said, no. The clairvoyant. To the magistrate, will you tell me whether I am obliged to answer these questions? Will you advise me? I use the crystal ball for my own amusement and to gratify my friends. Mr. Dutton, but the ladies who drive up in their carriages pay you. Witness said, sir, if they take up my time and use my room, they may make me a present. You would not expect them to take up my time without offering me something. Laughter. Mr. Dutton asked for an adjournment to get expert evidence asked to the defendant's handwriting. The magistrate allowed the application and all the letters being impounded by the court. And with that we leave the quiet brook at Prittlewell, the crowded court at Chelmsford, and the columns of the London press in the autumn of 1894. The papers have been folded, the verdict recorded, the scaffold dismantled. History, as ever, moves on. This has been News of the Times. I am Robin Coles, historian of telegrams, collector of railway timetables no one has asked for, an occasional student of Victorian moustache geometry. Until next time, our warmest wishes, and do mind where you agree to meet people on a Sunday evening.